If you're looking for a powerful mid-sized tablet, there's no question that the iPad Air 5 and the Samsung Galaxy Tab S8 are two excellent options. They were released within about a month of each other, they're similarly priced, at least in the US, and yet they're parts of vastly different ecosystems. There are definitely some critical differences that you should know about before buying one, and there's one area where I feel like both companies could have done better. Starting out with the displays, both are fully laminated, but the specs and the aspect ratios are completely different. So let's see which one would work better for you. The Tab S8 has an 11-inch display. It offers 120 Hz adaptive refresh rate, has a resolution of 1600 by 2560, and a pixel density of 274 pixels per inch. The iPad Air 5 has a slightly smaller 10.9-inch 60 Hz P3 display with a resolution of 1640 by 2360 and 264 pixels per inch. When you look at 11 inches versus 10.9 inches, we're not talking about a major difference, but the Tab S8 does have an aspect ratio of 16 by 10 versus approximately 3 by 2 on the iPad Air 5. When you're watching a video, you'll notice a larger image on the Tab S8 with much smaller black bars at the top and the bottom. So if this is the primary use for this tablet, it's definitely a bonus. The iPad Air 5 will give you a smaller overall image and noticeably larger black bars, but it will give you a physically wider tablet in portrait mode, which is nice when you're drawing or taking notes with the Apple Pencil. The Tab S8 also has an adaptive 120 Hz display, meaning that it can adjust the refresh rate on the fly to balance providing a fluid and responsive user experience and maximizing battery life. This is a feature that Apple offers. It's called ProMotion, but it's only available on the two iPad Pro models. The iPad Air 5 has a 60 Hz display, so the various animations provided by the user interface are not as smooth. Now, other areas where you'll notice 120 Hz on the Tab S8 are when you're scrolling or when you're navigating around the home screen. Now, as far as the quality of the displays, they're both quite good. As you'd expect at this price point, we're not getting the best displays from either company, like those are reserved for the higher end models. So if that's something that you're interested in, check out the Super AMOLED displays on the Samsung Tab S8 Plus or the Tab S8 Ultra, or you could go with the Liquid XDR display on the 12.9-inch iPad Pro. Now back to the iPad Air 5 and the Tab S8. When I take into account the cost of these tablets, I'm very happy with the overall quality of the displays for everything that I've done so far. Both displays are sharp, the colors are vibrant, and whether you're playing games, you're watching movies, surfing the web, or editing photos and videos, you'll be happy with what you see. The iPad Air 5 display is a bit less reflective, and if you plan on using your tablets in bright environments or where you're outside and you're going to have to deal with reflections, I would recommend going with the iPad Air 5. In both cases, if you're using your tablet in very challenging conditions, then I would consider adding a screen protector that also reduces reflections, and I'll link to a few of the ones that I use in the description. When we look at the size and the design, the iPad Air 5 and the Tab S8 appear to be quite similar, but again, there are some noteworthy differences. As far as the overall construction, both are machined aluminum all the way around, both have rounded corners, squared off edges, and small bezels. And I haven't had any issues with the build quality or with either of them bending. In addition to volume controls, both tablets offer fingerprint sensors integrated into the power buttons for biometric authentication. On the Tab S8, it's located on the long edge, and on the iPad Air 5, it's on the short edge. And in both cases, once you program one finger from either hand, you'll quickly get used to it. Now, the Tab S8 also gives you the option of using facial recognition with the front-facing camera. It's less secure than the fingerprint sensor, but it's more convenient, so you'll have to choose whether it's right for you. Now, without question, one significant advantage of the Tab S8 is the micro SD card slot, which lets you expand the internal storage by up to 1 terabyte. That means that you can relatively inexpensively add a lot of storage space, and you can use this additional storage for files and for apps. Now, not every single app will give you the option of moving to the micro SD card, but the majority of the apps and games that I tried to move did, and they continue to run smoothly from the card. And I'm going to revisit this later on in the configuration section because it does end up being really important. When we look at the audio system, both tablets have 4 speaker grills, but the iPad Air 5 only has 2 speakers, whereas the Tab S8 actually has 4. Now I think the speakers on the iPad Air 5 are quite good for a tablet at this price point, but they are outdone in this case by the 4 AKG tuned speakers on the Tab S8. And if you're making a decision that's based on audio quality, the Tab S8 sounds fuller, richer, and provides a better overall soundstage. Now personally, I use headphones for the vast majority of what I do, which includes watching and editing video, streaming movies or music, and playing games. And in both cases, we're not getting a 3.5mm headphone jack, so you'll need to use Bluetooth headphones or an adapter. Now both tablets have a USB-C port for charging and accessories, and I'm putting together accessory videos for each tablet. Now let's get to the camera systems, where the iPad Air 5 has a 12 megapixel ultra-wide front-facing camera versus a slightly higher resolution 13 megapixel 4K camera on the Tab S8. And here's a quick sample of the camera and the microphone. This is a camera and mic test on the Tab S8 and the iPad Air 5. This should give you a pretty good idea of the type of image quality that you should expect and the type of audio quality that you're going to get. Now both tablets also have a feature where the front-facing camera can track and follow a subject as it moves around the frame. And then they can zoom in and out to keep it properly framed. Apple calls this feature a center stage, and Samsung calls it auto framing, and Apple's implementation offers smoother dampening and tighter framing. Now moving on to the rear-facing cameras, the iPad Air 5 has a 12 megapixel wide camera, and the Tab S8 has a dual camera system with a 13 megapixel wide camera and a 6 megapixel ultra wide. Now I mention this a lot, but I very rarely use the rear-facing cameras on my tablets beyond the testing that I do for reviews, because I always have at least one of my phones with me, and it's just so much more convenient. But here are a couple of samples from both. Now, if you're looking to do more with your tablet and use it as more of a laptop replacement, then both of them have smart connectors which allow them to communicate with dedicated keyboard cases. The Tab S8 has 2 options from Samsung which sell for between $150 and $200. The original book cover keyboard has a trackpad, a slot on the back which protects the S Pen while it's being stored, and the back separates from the keyboard itself for when you want to use your Tab S8 in tablet mode. The Ultra version of the book cover keyboard is a bit more compact when you're using it. It's more sturdy, but it doesn't protect the S Pen when it's charging, and it doesn't include a trackpad. Now, the iPad Air 4 is compatible with Apple's smaller Magic Keyboard, which costs around $300. There are also some third-party options from Logitech and ESR. Now, personally, I prefer the overall build quality, the sturdiness, and the feel of the keys and the trackpad on the Magic Keyboard. At the same time, I really like the fact that the book cover keyboard protects the S Pen and that I'm able to separate the back from the keyboard so I can use the Tab S8 in tablet mode while still protecting the back and having a place for the S Pen. And this is also a good time to talk about the stylus options. So Samsung includes the S Pen with the price of the Tab S8, whereas with the iPad Air 5, you will need to buy the 2nd generation Apple Pencil separately for about $130. So make sure that you include that when you're comparing the cost if you plan on buying one of them. Now the S Pen can be stored on the side or on the back of the Tab S8, but it only charges on the back. And the 2nd generation Apple Pencil is stored and charges on the side of the iPad Air 5. Now I have to admit that I'm not an artist, so I use both of these for taking notes, for marking up and signing documents, and for sketching, and both have worked really well for me. I experience very low latency, and as I mentioned earlier, both displays are fully laminated, so the image looks like it's painted on top of the display. The tip of the stylus looks like it's actually coming in contact with the content that's being created. Now, in case you haven't had a chance to use both, I want to mention that each stylus has a very different feel to it when it's hitting the display. The tip of the S Pen feels softer, so when you write or draw with it, it's going to feel more like using a real pen on a pad of paper, where the pages compress as you press down and apply pressure. And the Apple Pencil has a more firm tip, it has a slightly harsher and louder tap, and it feels like you're writing on a single sheet of paper on a hard surface. Now, this is one of those areas where it really comes down to personal preference. Like, one isn't definitively better than the other, and I hope that this description of the feel was helpful. Now, both Stylus Options offer additional functionality with either double tap on the Apple Pencil or the dedicated button on the S Pen, but only the S Pen has Bluetooth functions which allow you to wirelessly control media playback, take pictures, or perform a few other useful tasks. Now let's quickly discuss performance, where we'll talk about both benchmarks and real-life use. So the Tab S8 comes with the new Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 chip, and both the 128 and 256 gigabyte options come with 8 gigs of RAM. The iPad Air 5 comes with the extremely impressive M1 chip, and both the 64 and 256 gigabyte models come with 8 gigs of RAM. If you're interested in benchmarks, I'll quickly cover them and then we'll move on to real life use. So for single core performance, we're looking at 1702 on the iPad Air 5, versus 1043 on a Tab S8. And for multi-core performance, we're looking at 7220 versus 3194. In both cases, a higher number is an indicator of better performance. So you can see that the M1 chip significantly outperforms the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 chip, at least for benchmark tests. But what about day-to-day use when you're browsing the web, when you're using various productivity apps, playing games, or multitasking? The Tab S8 comes with Android 12 and One UI 4.1, which I think does a fantastic job and continues to improve multitasking and the overall user experience. For example, the new dynamic multi-window toggle allows you to have 3 apps open at the same time, which is nice when I'm working on a video and I'm referencing multiple sources. Apple introduced some new multitasking capabilities with iPadOS 15, and the iPad Air 5 can have 2 apps open side by side. You can have pop-up windows and slide over windows, and you can use the new multitasking menu to quickly see multiple windows within the same app. So when you're using these tablets with their tablet OS, the features are very similar. I might give the slight edge to the iPad OS because I find it a bit more refined and it's easier to use. Now, both tablets can also be used as additional displays for compatible desktops and laptops. Apple calls this feature Sidecar and Samsung calls it Second Screen. But the Tab S8 has one significant advantage when you want more of a laptop or a desktop-like experience, because it has DeX. Now, if you're new to Samsung tablets, DeX essentially reboots the tablet with an OS that looks very similar to what you get from a laptop. You've got a taskbar where you can minimize and see active apps, you have an actual desktop with icons, and you can run multiple floating windows or snap windows to the sides of the display. Now, if you happen to have an external monitor, a keyboard, and a mouse, you can connect all 3 and then run a dual display setup with full external monitor use without black bars. By comparison, iPadOS only lets you mirror your display and it still doesn't stretch out to the entire display, so I'm definitely going to give the edge to the Tab S8. Now, when we look at the apps, the operating system support, and the ecosystems, we find some interesting differences. As far as available apps, the Apple App Store, the Google Play Store, and the Galaxy Store have lots of options for pretty much everything you need. In general, I'm going to give the edge to the iPad Air 5 because overall the apps seem to be better optimized, but as I've said in recent videos, the gap continues to diminish. A few creative apps like Affinity Photo and Procreate are still only available for the iPad, but I'm really happy to see that there's an Android version of LumaFusion on the horizon. And when it comes to long-term operating system support, Samsung made some much needed enhancements and is now promising 4 years of OS updates and 5 years of security updates. At the same time, Apple continues to be the leader in this department. I can still update my 8-year-old iPad Air 2 to the latest iPadOS 15. Long-term operating system support is not something that a lot of first-time buyers take into account when they make their decision, but both of these tablets have extremely powerful chips, plenty of RAM, and they aren't budget devices, so they should continue to serve you well for years to come. Now, when we look at the two ecosystems, we do see that Samsung has made some significant improvements over the past few years. They added integration between multiple devices, wireless file and text sharing, and additional cross-device integration. And while again, we see that Samsung continues to shrink the gap, Apple's ecosystem is still more tightly integrated due to years of experience and the fact that they have full control over the hardware and the software. Now, moving on to battery life, I'm getting about 10 hours of typical use on the iPad Air 5 versus about 12 to 14 hours on the Tab S8. Now keep in mind that this completely comes down to what you're doing. If you're watching video over Wi-Fi, you're going to use up a lot less battery than if you're playing games or if you're rendering video. The Tab S8 is also capable of accepting faster charging at 45 watts versus 30 watts on the iPad Air 5. And keep in mind that the iPad Air 5 does come with a 20-watt charger, while the Tab S8 doesn't come with a charger at all. Now, as long as I'm not spending hours editing video or playing games, I have no problems getting through a day of typical use on a single charge with either of these. Now, of course, if I decide to end my day with a few hours of gaming, then I'm going to need to charge both devices. And that's something that I'm used to now with every mobile device. Now, as far as actual gameplay, both chips are extremely capable and easily run any of the games that I play. I get a lot of questions about PUBG settings. So on the Tab S8, I can go to HDR for graphics if I want extreme frame rate, and Ultra HD graphics with ultra frame rate. On the iPad Air 5, I can go up to balanced for graphics if I want extreme frame rate, and I can move up to Ultra HD graphics and ultra frame rate. I also played Genshin Impact on both devices, and I had an extremely smooth and responsive gaming experience. I know that the M1 chip is more powerful, so it has a theoretical edge, but I haven't seen that translate into improved gameplay so far, and I'll continue to update you in my follow-up videos. Now, of course, if you're looking into the future and you know the games will continue to demand more and more resources, then the additional headroom on the iPad Air 5 in terms of performance is more likely to become a factor. Both tablets also performed extremely well when paired with a controller and streaming games using Xbox Game Pass. I ran all the usual games that I play, and since the displays are about the same size, I wouldn't give either one of them a definitive edge. As long as I had a good internet connection, both absolutely crushed every game that I played without any issues. The only area where I continue to prefer iPad OS is when it comes to pairing and unpairing a controller, because it just seems to be more reliable. Now we're getting to the part that I may get some pushback on, but I do think that both companies could have done better. So the Tab S8 comes with 8 GB of RAM and then 128 GB for $699 or 256 GB for $779. The iPad Air 5 also comes in two versions and both offer 8 GB of RAM. The base model comes with 64 GB for $599, and there's a 256 GB model for $749. And I'm using the prices on the Apple and Samsung websites, but you can usually find better prices by using the links in the description. So here are my thoughts about these two decisions, starting with Samsung. I wish that they would have kept the 512 gig option that was available on the Tab S7, but maybe they saw that not a lot of people were buying it, especially because you're able to inexpensively add internal storage with the micro SD card. And if that was the reason for taking it away, I get it. With Apple, I don't exactly understand releasing a device with 64 GB of storage in 2022, especially because it has an extremely powerful chip and Apple has fantastic long-term support. There's no reason why the iPad Air 5 wouldn't still be a great device 6, 7, or even 8 years from now, but I would be worried about running out of storage. Personally, I would have liked to see 128 and 512 gig models, and I'd love to know what you think about the storage options for both devices. Now you should see how the Tab S8 Ultra compares with the 12.9-inch iPad Pro. Hopefully this comparison was helpful. Click on my face to subscribe. You know what I always say, buy it nice or buy it twice. Good luck and see you soon.